I'd like to now turn to the next speakers, Chelsea Mayor Jane Pacheco and Dexter Board of Education member Jennifer Kangas. I think Mayor Pacheco is first. Mayor Pacheco ran for office in part on the platform of greater civility. And in Western Washtenaw, that's in part a product of the experience of having been confronted by challenges, what Mayor Pacheco calls fear-based strategies. So with that as an introduction, I'd like to ask her to unmute and proceed with the discussion. Mayor Pacheco.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Can you see me?
I can.
Okay.
No, I can't see you. Sorry, I can't see you.
Oh, I was going to say I can't see myself. My screen is on.
But it's okay. We can hear you. I would say just proceed.
Okay. Hello, my name is Jane Pacheco. I am currently the mayor, the newly elected mayor of the city of Chelsea. Prior to that, I have spent 8 years as a city council member. And before that, a longtime member of the Western Washtenaw Democrat Club. Thanks for inviting me today, Eli and the WCDP. I've been familiar with the organization for a long time, worked with them, but have not presented. And I am hoping today to share a little bit about my experience with my last mayoral campaign race. So Eli and all, what I was thinking I would do is talk a little bit about what led up to this last campaign, what I saw happen during the campaign, the trends that we're seeing in Western Washtenaw. I know we invited Jennifer Kangas, who is going to be speaking about the Dexter School Board and her experiences. And what I'm hoping to do is, get through the portion of, sharing with you my experiences and a little bit about how I addressed what was happening. Hopefully let Jennifer talk a little bit about the same thing. And then, we didn't talk about this ahead of time, Jennifer, but what I'm really hoping to do is have some time left at the end for folks to have questions of both of us and potentially have, some discussion about what I think we're going to be seeing much more of in the coming campaign cycles. So if that sounds good for you all, I am just going to tell you, let's see, you folks are all in the political know somewhat, so you've been paying attention to what's been happening, maybe not as much in sort of the smaller townships and cities and the villages in the western part of the county, but we have had, we have had our share of culture war and disinformation and divisive politics galore. So what I'm going, the part of time I'm going to kind of start with is maybe last spring. So spring of 2001, as we're sort of looking into, who's going to be running for these open council seats, who's going to be running, for mayor. The Chelsea City Council and mayor seats are nonpartisan. They've always been nonpartisan in my memory. And, what sort of things were we seeing sort of leading up to the campaign? And they're very much in line with sort of similar things that we'd been seeing happen. Similar talking points and viewpoints and audiences that were starting to attend local school board meetings and other meetings as well, which increase in public comment is always welcome and appreciated, and it was, as someone else had mentioned, aided by the fact that we did have some access to remote meeting, which across the board has increased attendance and engagement in a lot of our public meetings. So one of the things that had been happening pretty frequently is, and just in the last year or so. So like I said, it's been in my 8-year experience that this hadn't been happening, but we have had several sort of cyber attacks where our city sort of email addresses were being hacked, and folks were sending out messages on our behalf, fraudulent messages on our behalf or on the behalf of the mayor or whatnot. And that was an increase that I hadn't seen before. In the summer of 2021, one of the things that happened, even before the campaign deadline or the nomination petition deadline, end of July, there were a real big uptick for us. Again, this is different for the cities of Ann Arbor and potentially Ypsilanti and other bodies, but for us there was a huge uptick in formal complaints and folks that were addressing just a litany of concerns about the behavior of council members. At one point, I think I had 4 formal complaints regarding my, personally regarding my, what the folks were alleging as like conflict of interest. And we had never really seen those types of things before. I did, print out a few, and they weren't just to me, they were to a number of council members. There's a number of complaints, but the language that these complaints included, and they were shared on social media, they were shared. We still have some print paper, so they were in the form of letters to the editor. They were at some point taken door to door, but they were formal complaints against council members for being engaged in, activist, activists and advocacy missions in the community. For me in particular, I'm part of a nonprofit called One World, One Family, which is a human rights advocacy organization, and it was repeatedly called out that this was a hate organization with a cult-like following that's seeking to indoctrinate our youth, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these complaints, it was deemed needed to go through sort of a formal vetting process, right? And they went to our city attorney, and we actually had a meeting on how do we deal with these complaints, because we had never seen anything like this before. And at some point this summer, the council took a vote on whether or not we needed public hearings on a particular complaint, one of the complaints, and the council voted against that. And that sort of activity seemed to die down after that. Then the campaign sort of took hold in earnest, and in the middle of the summer, and it was let me just say, I ran in 2013 for a partial term. So I ran in 13, 15, and 19. I was in the middle of my second full term when I decided to run for mayor. So I had gone through the election cycle 3 times prior to this. Each time I had checked the waiver for campaign finance, fundraising to pledge to raise less than $1,000. This sort of race at the time, for a long time in Chelsea, folks didn't even really have, candidates didn't really even utilize yard signs. That's only something that's of recent history, right? So I really hadn't intended to raise more than $1,000 for this election either. And I actually checked the box on my waiver, and right out of the gate, I was inundated with just a whole lot of things that I had never seen before in a Chelsea a council race. So there were social media posts about just things that that myself and other council members were positing for that just were not true. There were no truth to them. There were mail pieces mailed to all of the residents in the community with disinformation. There were in-person events, door-to-door canvassing, and my campaign responded with the campaign that we had intended to run all along, just a very positive, this is, these are the tenets of the campaign, this is how we need to get the message out. And really, we didn't necessarily respond to what was happening, but in some ways, the folks needed to some answers. So we would be canvassing, for example, and I had a targeted list for volunteers that we basically were hoping to speak with folks that hadn't typically voted in off-year election cycles, right? So we weren't going to door to door to door to door necessarily. We were targeting folks, trying to let people who don't vote in off-year cycles know that it's important to vote this year. And there were many, more than I could count on two hands, times that we would come to a door and we would hear from the resident that someone else was just here and they told us X, Y, and Z, 3 things that they said was part of your platform. Can you explain them? And they were 3 absolute, just not true statements about things that we'd never even had a vote or a statement on in my time on, some of them in my time on council. So it was really interesting. In fact, I had an injury this past fall. I hurt my foot in August. So I was at home quite a bit during the day. So I was virtual a lot, and I had canvassers at my door 3 different times. That once they realized who I was, they said, great, it was nice talking to you, and it was fine. But my neighbors would come over and ask me about the things that they had just said, and said, is there any truth to this, Jane? What are they talking about? And they were things that were very, very clearly designed to make people afraid, make them fearful of the direction that this candidate, me, would be taking our community. Likewise, the fundraising piece, right? We really didn't have any idea what other folks were spending until the campaign finance deadline happened. But I know that I was getting more and more requests for signage, and we actually ended up doing mail pieces that we hadn't intended on. And, as you all know, that is expensive. All of those things are expensive. Well, I ended up raising, I don't know, I think it was around $3,000 maybe for my campaign, which, may not sound like a lot, but remember, this is way more than we've ever done before. And I do have some notes here. We had 3 open council seats, and there were 6 people running for 3 seats and 2 people running for the mayor. And the total funds raised of the folks that were running for the council seats that were, let's say, of the same mindset, right, as I was, we raised together cumulatively about $5,700. And the tabulation at that time was about 90 donors that came from within the city of Chelsea and 29 out-of-town donors. Conversely, the two candidates that ran in conjunction with the other mayoral candidate raised $10,000 from 17 in-town donors and 42 out-of-town donors. So they were much bigger donations from out of town. And it's just unheard of. It's the most, the most that has ever been raised for any, city council or village, or, it's unprecedented. So one of the things that I think is important to realize is, and I pulled some of these numbers for us, and I don't have anything to show you, and it wouldn't have worked anyway with my screen, but I think Jeff or someone had mentioned about the importance of turnout, and the majority of our council seats, all of our council seats are on off-year elections. So the year that I ran in 13, we did have quite a few council members, and it looks like, trending, obviously, the more candidates there are, you tend to have a better turnout. Less candidates or unopposed, less turnout. But in 13, our turnout here in town was 22%. In 15, less candidates on the ballot, 16%. In 17, 29%. And then in 19, the last time I ran, it was 33%. This election cycle in 2021, with the only thing on the ballot was this council members and the mayor seat, the turnout was 46%. It is only, I think, the fact that the turnout was 46% that we were able to win this election. I'm getting a couple of questions here. The funding, do I have the funding links handy? I don't. I just pulled some information right from campaign finance on Washtenaw. But one of the things that I've been noodling with, all through that campaign and after, is the fact that how do you deal with, all of these residents, all of these constituents, all of these folks that are just being inundated with these messages of fear. And it's, it's been proven, in academic studies that, that messages with fear are nearly twice as effective as messages without fear. I mean, that campaigns use fear to drive votes, to candidates and away from opponents. That this is a strategy that we are, we're seeing, nationally, and obviously a lot of what's happening nationally is coming right down to the very, very local neighborhoods and school boards and council seats, even to the point where, a lot of my time was spent talking about issues that really weren't germane to city council business. So, we did some work about how to address, folks that are, have these issues. And a lot of my campaign was based on, civil discourse and civility. And I have a background in nonviolent communication and tactics around, building bridges and, network weaving and unity, and really trying to put those things into practice during this campaign as I'm, walking door to door and talking with constituents. It was, fascinating to actually be able to practice this on a day-to-day basis and realize just how hard it is and how difficult, but it's absolutely necessary, to stay positive, to stay on track, to be, to be hopeful about what you're hoping to accomplish. and in, you know, in all of our missions, that is, you know, positive solutions for every one of our, you know, constituents. You know, we're trying to bring those solutions to light. And I think the hardest part was, you know, that we just have this disagreement, I guess, around, you know, the definition of what the truth is in some ways or shape form, but doesn't mean that we can't continue to have that conversation and, you know, try to flesh out those ideas. But with that, I want to send it over to Jennifer, because I do have things to add a little bit about, you know, what's happening in our school district, but I want her to be able to talk about her experience. And then, like I said, if there's any time, I think it would behoove us to have some discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pacheco. Jennifer Kangas.
Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Jennifer Kangas, and I am a trustee with Dexter Community Schools. I was elected in November of 2020, so it was during the presidential election. I pulled a couple of numbers regarding the numbers of voters. I'm sure you all know the data better than I do. But basically, in 2020, there were 319,000 votes in Washtenaw County, and in 2021, there were 18,000. So as Jane just shared, you know, the off year, there's just such a low turnout compared to the presidential elections, which is interesting. Our district in Dexter is roughly 72% Democrat and 26% Republican. And so I thought we were a little bit more purple, but we're more blue than purple, kind of a light blue district. We have 3,600 students. There's roughly 300 students per class. And our district is huge. We include Dexter Township, Webster Township, Lima Freedom, and Lodi, as well as Scioto Township, and then the city of Dexter. So it's a really large footprint, and we have a campus that's in Dexter, so it's a campus setting. So I was asked to share a little bit about the composite of our district and kind of what we're facing. As every district, I think in the state, there may be a couple of districts that have 9 trustees. There are a couple of districts that have 9, but we have 7 trustees in Dexter, and we have a 6-year term that we are elected to. So I was elected in 2020. I will expire in 2026 and run again at the time. So that's kind of a barrier for entry for a lot of candidates who think about running for our school board. It's a long commitment. I have been an activist within the district since our children were in 1st grade. So that's about 12, 13 years, 14 years. And I got started with funding and policy, and really when the push from Snyder and everything was going on regarding lifting the cap on charter schools and the defunding of public education, et cetera, I really got involved with that and wanted to share the news and help parents understand what was going on within the district. And so at the time, this was back in 2011, I believe, I started a group which started as meeting as a coffee house, and we just talked about funding. And I reached out to the board at the time, and superintendent and the union and other parents, and invited these weekly meetings to share information. And then that morphed into a Facebook group, which was called Friends of Dexter Community Schools. It still is in existence, which I was administrator for. I wanted to make this a space for political conversation to be able to occur, but in a civil manner. And most groups at the time were really opposed to talking about politics because it can, spiral downwards really quickly. And so I ended up meeting and inviting a Republican at the time to co-moderate with me. And we had a lot of discussions, and we went back and forth openly about, talking about different topics. And, there was the third grade reading bill, and she started out saying, yeah, that makes sense. And I started, so we talked about the pros and cons of that. So that was really helpful. And our participation within the group grew. And I would say that was a very nice way to reach across the aisle to many parents within the district. So I just want to share that. I've since stepped down. I don't think it's appropriate for me to be the moderator of a group as a trustee on the board, but anyway, so that's something of interest. Let's see what else. We could talk about funding all day long, which I don't think you guys want to talk about. One thing that the different topics that are coming up with our board, which I think are probably similar to what each of you hear, but we hear about the indoctrination of kids, and when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, reaching out to BIPOC populations, et cetera, although Dexter is primarily white, but parents will come to the board or write the board frequently about how they don't want their children to be indoctrinated, et cetera, which is not happening. We're not teaching critical race theory. I think that that's pretty universal. Masking, of course, is another one. There's concerns parents will bring up saying, if my child isn't wearing a mask, well, of course they have to wear a mask, but or if they're not vaccinated, that the parents will say, well, my child's being bullied. So there's that going on. And then on the converse, there are the students and parents who are concerned for their safety. And so there's just a give and take there. Of course, the school shooting that happened in Oxford has been a big topic of concern for all districts. We've spent a lot of time doing tracing of threats, and it's everywhere from the K-2 to all the way up to the high school, where we obviously have to spend much more time tracking down any potential threat. And then, of course, staffing is a huge concern. We were closed on Friday, so just trying to stay open. And our board has made a commitment to do the best that we can to stay open safely. And so that's going on. And one big topic that I'm really pushing for, and I'm trying to push every time I can, is climate change and carbon neutrality, and trying to get the district to look at electric buses, semi-permeable surfaces within the parking lots if we're going to do a repaving project, stormwater management, et cetera. I also work for Huron River Watershed Council as an operations director, so I'm reminded daily about all of the ways that we can move forward together to help mitigate climate change. But over and above that, I think that this is a really important topic for students. And so that's I know it's political, but still there are a lot of students on both sides of the aisle that really understand climate change and that want climate change that want us to do as much as we can as policymakers to work on that. So
Jennifer, I'm wondering if we could leave some time for questions from the audience.
Sure.
I mean,
Yep.
it's up to you, but I'm going to run a little bit short. So if you'd like questions, I mean, maybe take a couple more minutes, and then we'll ask.
That's pretty much all I had to say. But yes,
Lovely.
that would be great.
Thank you so much for being flexible. So I'd like to open the floor to questions. Mayor Pacheco said she'd like to have this be a discussion. I think that would be great. If you would use the raised hand function on the screen. So I'm looking at the attendees. I don't see any raised hands. I'm looking at the panelists.
Eli, if I can just add one thing about the school board elections. I don't know what the January numbers are, but from an article from October of 2021, there were some numbers that said that they'd been tracking over 80 school board recall efforts against 207 board members in 2021. the highest number since it began tracking in 2010. And I want to bring this up because the recall votes, this is new. This is new for us in Chelsea and Dexter and Saline and Manchester. The number of folks, putting in complaints and recalls and, Zoom bombing, it's happening in our communities. And you and I talked about, bringing this to, the WCDP, just to make sure that folks are aware that this stuff is happening. And it's very, very well organized from, national groups that have charters in every state, in all of these counties.
Thank you. Yes, that is what one reads about in the national press, but I did think it was important to discuss what's happening here in Washtenaw County. It's not some distant place. So I'd again like to ask the audience if there are any questions. I think I see one hand up. Nope, let's see. Yes, Janet Cannon, I'm going to unmute you. I think you can unmute yourself now, Janet.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, thank you so much for bringing this in because it's so important. Do we know about other communities throughout the county? Have there been many efforts in other communities? And the other thought that I'm having is that in a relatively small community, perhaps there's a way to sort of bypass those well-funded outside activist attempts and try to reestablish some dialogue with, how would you say, people who lean conservative and get swayed by these arguments. I don't know what sort of, we, as Jane mentioned, you are actually, sorry, I'm a little bit hard to keep the train of thought with everything that's happening, but as Jennifer was mentioning about that previous dialogue that she had with people on other sides of other persuasions, is there any hope for reestablishing that as a concerted effort somehow? I mean, maybe we can help with that.
Thank you. Either of you should feel free to chime in on that one.
I do see this as I do see fear-based tactics, as Jane mentioned, being used in districts. I've heard about this in Saline. They worked really hard on adopting a new health reproductive curriculum, which brought a lot of pushback. And so, yes, I think that as much as we can to get out into the community and to talk with people and to establish, that we're not that much different. There were a lot of people that supported me on both sides of the aisle, and they did so because I talked to them. And I think that's what Jane was talking about too. So I think it's just really important, as much as we can, to get out of our bubbles and reach out.
Thank you very much. Mayor Pacheco, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I would just agree. It is tough, to talk to people, especially in this COVID climate right now. But I mean, as much one-on-one as you can have with folks, a lot of us have, I don't know, it's cliche to say, but we want similar things. So how do we put a face on those issues? And in doing that, we need to just have discussions and be civil and step outside of the echo chamber of our social media.
Great, thank you. Sam Copey, I'm probably mailing your name. You're permitted to talk if you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I had speculated. I mean, I hear about what's going on throughout the country in terms of coordinated attacks on school boards and various exciting things going on. I was just wondering if there's any aid that other members from Ann Arbor and other places in Washtenaw County can help fight these right-wing attacks. And I'm just thinking, I mean, I applaud the work that the two people are doing, but is there a good way that we can help, like, get intelligence and kind of, I mean, the attacks are very orchestrated and well planned and well thought out. It seems like no disrespect, but of course, be nice to your neighbors and one-on-one communication is great, but aiding with some intelligence and with some sort of strategy for countering them could be helpful, because these are nationally coordinated campaigns and resources, and we should at least know what we're fighting against. And it seems like some sort of effort could be made in a coordinated way to do that, not just ad hoc. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do either of you wish to respond to that?
I completely agree. This is Jane. I think about what I can do, and then, what can we do, together collectively. And one of the things is realizing, what actually is out there and what is happening. And some of the research that I've done and other folks have done, it is astonishing. I mean, there are, in the chat, people are putting links to organizations that are doing, organizing on the more conservative side. And one of the ones that I found that I can put in there as well is called No Left Turn in Education. And it's an example of a national organization that is, they're publishing, guidebooks, how to run for election, what the talking points should be. And we're seeing, things verbatim showing up at council meetings and school board meetings. So part of what can happen, an idea of what can happen is to unearth those resources that, that are that are positing, the democratic ideal, and on the same vein, how to run for school board, how to run for local elections, what can we do to support, those campaigns, but also, I think we do have to, engage in our, engage in civil society. We have to teach our kids. We have to speak out to our neighbors. We have to take ownership over, some of these decisions in a way that makes, I think, a lot of people uncomfortable. And we have to destigmatize that uncomfortable, awkward conversation with actual tools to help people have those conversations and engage in their community.
Thank you. Actually, we have time for about a 2-minute exchange. So it's Theresa Reid. If you want, I can ask a very brief question, because we have another topic, which I think you're going to want to give some time to as well. Theresa?
Okay, great, thanks. Jane and Jennifer, thanks so much for your courageous work and your insight. I'm just thinking, as other people have suggested, including in chat, that we need now to start conferring with you and building a county-wide strategy and set of resources for vulnerable candidates. This is hard to do by yourself. Really hard to do. And so I hope that we can, that the whole county party can tap your experience and start to build a set of resources to support candidates and counter this kind of pernicious attack on our democracy. That's all.
I think actually at this point, I'm going to have to stop this part of our discussion.
Can I just add something just really quickly regarding Sam's question? If, the things people say it all the time, but if you can write your school board member or write your council member or write your mayor in support of X, Y, and Z, even if you think that it should be a no-brainer. So in support of, the health curriculum that's coming up, or in support of masking, or in support of whatever, we hear from the people who are unhappy. And so it's really helpful to hear from those who support whoever it is that you appreciate are doing. It just really bolsters us, because sometimes we wonder what's going on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mayor Pacheco, do you have anything else you want to add? A last sentence.
I don't. Just thank you for inviting us. I'd be happy to help.
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.